So today we're going to dive into a specific and pretty intense perspective on what's happening in Iran right now. The source material we're looking at really frames this whole conflict in the starkest terms imaginable, as a nation that has hit its absolute boiling point.
And right off the bat, we get this quote, which comes directly from our source. It really sets the stakes. This isn't just about a protest anymore. It's a declaration that this is it. This is the final all-or-nothing moment. It's now or never.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about what's reportedly happening on the ground. According to this viewpoint, we're not just looking at protests. We're looking at a full-blown revolution that has now hit its most critical and most violent phase.
And we're talking about huge numbers here. The guest in our source material describes streets filled with millions of people. The key thing they emphasize is just the sheer scale of it, and that these demonstrations, happening all over the country, started out peacefully. So how did the regime respond? Well, the language used to describe it is pretty brutal. The source alleges that because the regime sees this as their endgame, they've unleashed what's being called a scorched earth crackdown on their own people.
And that crackdown comes with a number. A really shocking one. Now, it's super important to understand where this figure comes from. The guest in the source video says that Iran's crown prince reported over 3,000 casualties. And to put that in perspective, they point out that's a higher death toll than 9/11.
Let's move on, because this physical battle on the streets is running parallel to a huge digital one. The fight for information, for getting news out to the world and for just being able to access the internet is described as a central part of this whole conflict.
And in this information war, a really unexpected name pops up. According to the guest, Elon Musk is actually considered a hero of this movement. Why? Because of his reported role in getting hundreds of thousands of Starlink internet devices into the country, which gave people a vital connection to the outside world.
So this lays out the tech battle, and it's this constant game of cat and mouse. First, you have Starlink opening up the internet. Then, the regime reportedly hits back with a total blackout. And to counter Starlink specifically, the source claims they're using military-grade jammers from China, which just strangles the flow of information.
So why does this information war matter so much? Well, here's the really chilling part. The guest suggests that because of this blackout, the numbers we're hearing, even those really high casualty figures, might only be scratching the surface. They could represent just 20 to 30% of what's actually happening on the ground.
All right. This next part is a really significant piece of the narrative presented in our source, and it has to do with the role of an external figure, former U.S. President Donald Trump, and the hope that is apparently being placed in him.
So you might be asking, okay, why him specifically? Well, according to the source, he's seen as a decisive man of action who keeps his word. They believe he knows how to use the military strategically and quickly. It's claimed his words have given people a ton of hope, so much so that people are even renaming streets after him.
So that's the big question, isn't it? When people talk about intervention, what do they actually mean? What specific action are they hoping for from the outside?
And this is where the source gets very, very specific. They draw a clear line in the sand. What they want is described as strategic and quick action, maybe something like past strikes on nuclear facilities. But what they absolutely do not want is a ground war. The guest is really emphatic about this, saying no Iranians want boots on the ground because, quote, the Iranian people themselves are the boots on the ground.
Okay, so if we're not talking about a full-on ground invasion, what is the message being sent to the rest of the world? This is where we get into the call for solidarity and the powerful symbols that are being used to rally global support.
And one gesture of solidarity that's highlighted as being especially meaningful is for people to adopt and display what's being called the real flag of Iran.
The difference between the two flags is all about symbolism. Our source describes the current flag by referencing, quote, the Islamic thing in the middle. But the flag that people are rallying behind, the real flag, features a golden lion right in the center. And it represents a completely different vision for the country's identity.
And this all builds to a final and what the guest calls a poetic historical parallel. The belief that's expressed is that just as one chapter began 47 years ago, now the 47th U.S. president is going to be the one to end it. It's presented by the source as this incredible story of historical correction.
And that's where we'll leave it. The perspective we've just walked through is one of a domestic uprising, a revolution from within, that is also looking outward for a very specific type of help from a very specific leader. So it leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. When a domestic revolution looks for an external savior, what are the potential futures that could unfold?